I have an infant daughter. She's just a few months old, and I fear for her. I fear for the world that I am going to have to raise her in. When I see things like Sam Smith's performance at the Grammys just recently, where he's dressed up like Satan, and all of the other people on stage are basically strippers, it makes me shudder a little bit. It scares me away from my own people, is what it feels like. I'm very high in openness. I'd consider myself an artistic person, and yet the absurd ideology that has captured the media landscape that I think is so perfectly demonstrated by what happened at the Grammys, it scares me. And I think it's far too easy to shrug off what happened at the Grammys as just transgressive expression, artistic boundary pushing. And I don't think I'm a Karen for pointing out that a standing ovation for someone publicly performing quite literally a depiction of Satan himself is not a great sign of the health of our culture. And yet, on the other side of the political aisle, I can't endorse what I see there either. I see Donald Trump selling NFTs, and I also see the complete unawareness of the older generation, particularly the boomer generation, of the plight of young people, of wage stagnation, of the unaffordability of life, of the effects that social media has had on the younger generation. And it hasn't been a broad net positive in a lot of ways. And that creates a generational divide that I think exacerbates what we call the culture war. And this culture war that we talk about, its greatest casualties are and will continue to be, for as long as it goes on, the youngest among us. It will be the children. And that's why I see my daughter and I wonder, what kind of school will I feel comfortable sending her to when she's 5 years old? What kind of friends do I want her to have? I am a big fan of Dr. Leonard Sachs. I don't know how many of you know who he is, but he's written quite a few books, and one of them is called The Collapse of Parenting. And he talks about the need to put limits on social media access for kids. And I definitely plan on doing that for my own kids. But how many parents know who he is, or regardless of knowing who he is, would be willing to ascribe to that advice for their own children? How many parents are on board with not giving their kids a smartphone until they're 16 years old? I don't know. My guess is probably not a lot. So that raises the question, if the quote-unquote culture war has become so toxic, where is the refuge if, because of social media, you can't just move schools for a better upbringing of your kids? The fact that social media has globalized pathological social trends is incredibly scary to me. And funny enough, I can see it clearly, I think, in my own church. I can see it in the Mormon church because I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And on both ends of this kind of social political spectrum, I see a narrowing of people's minds, of what they're willing to tolerate, the ideas they're willing to engage with. And this narrow-mindedness that's plaguing broader American culture, I see it in my church all the time, especially on social media. I see Sam Smith dancing as the devil at the Grammys, and I think surely this is a sign of decadence in our society. I personally worry a lot more about the inevitable right-wing backlash against quote-unquote wokeness. I think it'll be just as bad, if not worse, than the current state of affairs. Let's not forget that at both ends of the socio-political spectrum, life becomes absurd. And in order to create the world that our children need in order to grow up and live healthy and happy lives, we as individuals need to be willing to have the courage to live moral, upstanding lives and think for ourselves and educate ourselves outside of the typical institutions of education. And I think that the more that people are willing to engage with the great thoughts of the past, as well as current geniuses, many of whose books I plan on summarizing as a part of this channel, the more that we can engage with these amazing, great, and wise ideas and steer away from the mass media that is infecting our contemporary culture, the more of a shot that we have to, at the very least, find people who believe similar things, who feel similarly about the world, who are also politically homeless, but also very reasonable people who are worried as well about their kids or future kids, or are even debating not having kids at all because of how crazy the world is. And the world really is crazy right now, and it's intensified to a very dramatic degree because of mass media, because of social media. And that is a unique thing that our generation is facing that no other generation has faced before. Just the other day, I watched the movie Titanic. And in that movie, the owner of the ship Titanic says that even God himself couldn't sink that ship. And I think that it's really easy to take that sort of hubristic position to modern society. And it's easy to say that, oh, well, kids have survived worse in the past, so they'll be fine. Just get off social media and it'll be fine. As much as that's great advice for the individual, we live collective lives. We live in families, we live in communities, we live in states, and we live in nations. And it is important, because we live in a social structure, to speak out and to be courageous. And that has to come from a place of strength. And that has to come from understanding what is going on in the world. So, if you, like myself, are feeling politically homeless, socially homeless, religiously and spiritually homeless, or at least wandering, hopefully this channel and others can provide a little bit of light and hopefully temperance of the political and social discourse, because I don't think that things can continue as they are forever. Hopefully what I had to say resonated with you today. If it did, consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel. I do plan on posting more things. This is the Textual Awakening Podcast.